adventures and so forth, but making her way to Columbia University, her master's in African art. And she was particularly enthralled with the gold weights, and we have gold weights, really exciting, coming up in our next semester. And but then she made her way to pre-Columbian, to the arts of, let's just say, Mesoamerica, South America, and so forth, and her PhD and so forth. By the time she started there, more or less, in the 1970s, her oral exams in 1960s, her oral exams in 1968, and then on to her PhD in 71, and so forth, or continuing on. And then she was a full professor by, I'm going to say, 82. Is that correct? Yeah. 82. So she has been involved at Columbia teaching, scholarship, and so forth in pre-Columbian art and all things in between, many cultures, for over 40 years. She retired in 2013 with a fabulous send-off by some of her former students and all sorts of scholars, and put together manuscripts and so forth, including Kate Morris, who was here not too long ago. And so we're very, very honored today to have someone who intellectually has devoted her life to the study of art, but also to the study of cultures. And she would like to begin by talking about one of the essays here in this book, her latest out of 14 books, really that deals with the fact that Teotihuacan, Mesoamerica, and so forth and so on, stone tools. How do you build these colossal cities and buildings? Stone tools. So let's start with that.
Okay, first let me see if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This began in an interview with the BBC, where I was asked to talk about the great Olmec colossal heads. And I said this and that, whatever I could think of about them. And on the way home, I thought to myself, I never mentioned that they were carved by stone tools. And in fact, most of the scholars, including my fellow Molly, never said a word that Teotihuacan was created by a Stone Age stool kit. And so I began to ask myself why it is so. And it is often it's often been mentioned, of course, by the conquerors and others, how primitive the New World people were, because they did not have metal tools, they had stone tools, they did not have farmyard animals, they had no wheel, they had human sacrifices, and how come they built things like Teotihuacan and all these other things? I talked to some anthropologist friends who have told me that stones are actually pretty good to work with. Basalt makes a good hammer, flint and obsidian are very sharp. But nevertheless, even though there was gold, there was bronze, how come the New World did not develop metal tools? I mean, were they just stupid? And the answer came to me very, very easily, but not so much from the New World, but from the Old World. Because I asked myself, why did they go from stone to copper to bronze to iron to steel in such a short period of time? What was happening there? I mean, were they that much smarter? And it was very clear that the Old World situation was very different. People came from Africa, moving on to Europe and Asia. There were already various hominids there, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans and others. And it was a situation of competition and conflict from the very beginning. And when civilizations developed in the Old World, there were at least 4 major ones and many secondary ones, and they were in conflict with each other and in competition. And the result of conflict and competition was that there was an enormous premium on the creation of better weapons. and the creation of sharper weapons. There was also interaction of ideas. Ideas came from one civilization to another. So that the situation was very different. It also became evident to me that in the old world, a great deal of invention, and having to do specifically with weapons, had to do with war. And that the old world was constantly at war, while at the same time traveling and trading. So, for example, a lot of invention happened specifically for weapons. For example, when the Chinese invented fireworks and that came to Europe, immediately they were turned into weapons. Gunpowder was turned into cannons and into muskets. And it was those cannons and muskets that eventually came to the New World. So that there was a weaponization desire and situation in the old world that did not exist in the New World. Now, what was happening in the New World? First of all, Asian migrants who came to the New World came into a situation where there were no other people. There was no competition. There were these great big animals like mammoths and sloths, which could be very well hunted by communal hunting methods. And they came into a land that was incredibly rich, had fantastic woods, great potential for agriculture, for domestication of the plants. Not so many possible domesticated animals. But the domesticated plants led to very adequate nutrition, very adequate food. So they came into a land where they could spread around using their stone tools as they came from Asia, and there was no necessity. So the answer to the stone tool question was they didn't need to do it. And even though they invented metallurgy around 2000 BC, there was no need for them to try to weaponize it, for them to try to get better. And partly that was the result of the fact that when civilization occurred in the New World, there was only two, Mesoamerica and the Andes. The areas in between, Central America and Northern Andes, only had some of the features of civilization, and they consisted of very tall mountains, and ideas made it through, but very slowly. And these two civilizations, the Andean and the Mesoamerican, were not in touch. No Mesoamerican ever conquered the Andes. No Andean ever conquered Mesoamerica. The Andeans were pretty good at conquering, so maybe in time they would have, gotten around to it. But so far they did not. It does not mean that they were totally cut off. Certain things spread from one area to the other, but not by traders. There were no Marco Polos, taking silk or stuff from one place to the other. Maize spread from Mesoamerica like 4,000 or 5,000 BC. In a couple of thousand years, it made it to South America. Metallurgy was invented in South America by about 2000 BC, and in a couple of thousand years, it made it to Mesoamerica. So it's not that they were completely sealed away from each other, but they were contacts were very slow. So the answer is that they did not need metal. They had bronze, they had gold, they had silver, and they used them as ornaments. So they also, the other thing that I would like to say about stone tools, it's amazing what you can do with stone tools. I mean, besides erecting huge monuments, they erected very finely carved and delicate things. And what they showed, what the monuments of ancient America show, is what you can do with stone tools. When you go to the New World, right away there's a desire for new tools. whereas the Mesoamericans were developing new ways of using old tools. This, of course, was not going to do much in the case of the conquest. But I think it's one way that we should look at the monuments as elaborations of what can be done with stone tools. Now, since they were mostly not interested in technique, they were interested in technique in things like textiles, for example. Every known way of making textiles they figured out. So if they were interested in some things, they did that. But getting back to the stone tools, so how did they do these monuments? How did they do these cities? And the answer to that, which Molly began to explore, was that essentially through human engineering, essentially by organizing and inspiring people. And we don't always know the answer of how they did this. It used to be thought that such ancient monuments, including the Egyptian ones, were done by slaves. But these cultures did not have slaves. They did not have standing armies. They did not have police. They had to talk their own people into working during the dry season in erecting monuments, for which various kinds of religious ideas were probably helpful, but also some suggestions of incorporation. Now, I don't think I'm going to go into that right now. Maybe I'll come back to it later. But in both South America and Mesoamerica, there is strong emphasis on the idea of reciprocity, on the idea that the elite does something and the others do something in return. So the development of cooperative systems. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that when they came into the New World, they were hunting cooperatively. That cooperative systems were the ways of getting things done. As I say, human engineering rather than technology seems to have been the ways to do it. I can do some more about that. But let me say something about human sacrifice, which I think everybody is interested in, and that was also mentioned. When I was a graduate student and I would go to conferences, various older anthropologists would say to me in a somewhat flirtatious way, "What's a nice girl like you studying the Aztecs?" And I guess what they meant by that is you must have some kind of kinky interests.
I have to interrupt. I just want to interrupt and say that it was Esther who wrote the first comprehensive book on Aztec art. It's 11 chapters, 75 plates, so it's considered, again, just a pillar of Aztec art. So she was a pioneer in that.
Yeah, because people didn't want to write about the Aztecs. But if you think about, look, human sacrifice is not a nice thing. I mean, I'm not going to try to argue that it's something that we should emulate or anything like that. But I think we should try to understand it. And the way I understand it is that it is an act of violence. And as far as I can see, the human species, at least as far as I know it, is a violent species. And we're violent in all different kinds of ways. Now, the ancient Mesoamericans and Peruvians did not have colossal battles. They had their stone-tipped weapons. And particularly the Aztecs, when they went to battle dressed in feathers and feather standards and a whole lot of elaborate gear. And their aim was to capture the leader of the opposition in order to take him back and sacrifice him later. So their wartime body counts were relatively small. They were not interested in killing in the battle particularly. They were interested, and if, how many guys does it take to take somebody back, a number of miles as a victim? It was a different idea idea of battle. Now, in comparison to that, our own battles all deal with actually killing troops in great numbers. We don't take them back. Moreover, by taking them back and sacrificing them, they were sacrificing them symbolically. They were sacrificing just like the outsiders at Teotihuacan that you mentioned. Whether they sacrificed them in the temples or whether they put them in the building stages, they were symbolic. I mean, they were two guys from Tikal. They were not sacrificing all of Tikal. Whereas we, in our present day of warfare, actually sacrifice people. We practice genocide. You can start adding them up, just in the 20th century. 6 million for Hitler, and I don't know, 50 million for Stalin, and 1 million for the Turks, and the, what was their names? I can't think of their names. Armenians, thank you. The Armenians, the Hutus and the Tutsis. I mean, we just go on killing people and genocide of people. There's no example of genocide that comes from the ancient world. So that their idea was largely a symbolic one. Which I also want to add something about peace and war. A lot of the art of ancient Mesoamerica deals with war, warriors and warrior regalia and the victims and so on. And you have to ask yourself, does that mean that they were at war all the time? And I usually think of the European painting in which the female nude is one of the favorite subjects. And does that mean that women were sitting around and walking around in the nude? What you do in representation is kind of what you wish for, what you desire, what you like to look at. And in ancient Mesoamerica, they did desire conquest and so on, although their idea of conquest was far smaller than our idea of conquest. Not only that, there were some complaints among the Aztecs that when the Aztec Empire was pacified, there was no war. They could not get any sacrifices for the temples. And so two states, the Aztecs and one of their traditional enemies, decided to come together periodically to stage a kind of fancy war in order that both of them could take prisoners home. And now this story is usually told from the point of view of sacrifice. You see, they wanted to take sacrifice. But I'm going to tell it from the point of view of peace, because it means that they had to do these artificial tournaments because there was peace. And that in fact, the ancient world, except for a lot of wars between neighbors and stuff like that, is relatively at peace. They were not threatened by, Mesoamericans and Andeans were not threatened by each other. They had no boating people, vandals, who were threatening them. Europeans also had the horse nomads. The horse was domesticated somewhere around 5,000. And horse nomads came raping and pillaging at periodic intervals, every 150,000 years. There was nothing like that in the New World. There were no invasions that they had to be afraid of, that they had to worry about. What? Oh, sorry. There are no invasions of people that they had to worry about. So they had a relatively peaceful time, nevertheless feuding with their neighbors and all that sort of thing. So Now I lost my train of thought here. Yeah. Well, so what I'm trying to suggest is that they had a good life. They had plentiful nutrition. They had some ways, which I think we're going to work out, in which people were incorporated into their social and political bodies. They were not afraid of anybody from the outside. And they were perfectly content with their stone tools. And so you have to, so this is mainly in greater detail what I was trying to explain to the BBC, should they ever be interested in pre-Columbian, as to what some of their subjects might be. So, for example, when I tried to imagine life in ancient America and what it would have been like, not necessarily in the middle of ceremonial and sacrifice, although I'm certainly not denying that that was there, I would say that they spent a lot of time building. And the reason they spent building is that it was a way of bringing the community together, working on a joint program, however that was exactly defined. People sat around, men and women, weaving textiles by the millions, both in Mesoamerica and in Peru. In Peru, one of the things they did after a project was finished was to have a big drunken fiesta. And in fact, drinking is described as one of the major problems in Peru of fermented chicha. So that was one of the things that they did. Another thing that they did in Mesoamerica, they were very fond of homilies, of speeches to young people and to visitors and to others about righteous and proper ways of behaving, which, if those translated passages indicate, were very, very boring and bored themselves to death too. And finally, there was wonderful music, especially among the Inca, which unfortunately has not survived except in colonial versions and in versions that have affected our modern pop music in the form of songs by Paul Simon and Garfinkel, so we can have some. It has entered into our own culture. And the Aztecs, believe it or not, I guess maybe once they got tired of the sacrifices, sat around making up poetry, composing verses which were sung by bards at their feasts, where probably they got drunk too. And here are some examples of these poems. Okay, yeah. Will I have to go like the flowers that perish? Will nothing remain of my name? Nothing of my fame here on earth? At least my flowers, at least my songs. Earth is the region of the fleeting moment. Is it also thus in the place where in some way one lives? Is there joy there? Is there friendship? Or is it only here on earth we come to know our faces? Now that's a poem that could have been written by anybody from any culture. And there are quite a number of, others, a volume of others that was collected by the Spanish, indicating that besides the gods and the Tlaloc and the rituals and whatever, people were people. They were concerned about life on this earth. They were concerned about life after death. Here is another poem. Let me see if that started on the previous page. Yes. Remove trouble from your hearts, O my friends. As I know, so do others. Only once do we live. Never mind the afterwards. Let us in peace and pleasure spend our lives. Come, let us enjoy ourselves. Let not those who live in anger join us. The earth is so vast. Oh, that one could live forever. Oh, that one never had to die. How about this? What are you meditating? What are you remembering, oh my friends? Meditate no longer. At our side, the beautiful flowers bloom. So does the giver of life concede pleasure to man. All of us, if we meditate, we remember, we become sad here. Not forever on earth, only a little while. Though jade, it may be broken. Though gold, it may be crushed. Though quetzal feather, it may be torn. Not forever on earth, only a little while. So, there's very little of this in the ancient world that has survived. It is just so happens that Aztec poetry has survived, that bits of music have survived. And I think one of the points that I would like to make is that they were not all that different from us. And that's why on the cover of my book I have the hand of an artist with a brush from a Maya engraving. Just a hand and a brush. And again, it could have been done by anybody. Thank you.
Just a couple questions here, and it is time to leave. The unique thing about Teotihuacan is that, Esther, when all of these Wagner gifts were given here to the DeYoung, the Fine Arts Museums, there were over 200 pieces. Most of these have been returned, but it was Esther who was called by our curator, Kathleen Barron, to say, help, come tell me what this is. And it was with Esther in the late 70s and into the 1980s that helped to sort of sort out our Teotihuacan gifts. So she has a long history, and she was one with Kathleen Barron, the former curator of AOA. They had the first Teotihuacan exhibition in 1993 here at the DeYoung. So these are very precious items, a very intriguing culture. So we want to thank very much Esther Pasztory for joining us today. Thank you. She's going to sit here. If you'd like to bring your book down or go buy a book, just right outside here, there are limited copies, and we want to